figuring out what to do at the end of this debate that would have taken me probably even longer, and I might have voted AF. I think the question of whether the counterplan solves or whether it links less, I think it's a little bit weird that 2AR just doesn't start with like, you should not judge kick the counterplan if we win, that it links to, you know, one of the links. They've got 3 separate link arguments, and I think you're very clearly ahead on the counterplan does link to the inflation link argument that they've read, because it does sort of the same thing as the plan and the counterplan. And I think the 2AR needs to start there and say that if we win this, A, there's no judge kick argument made in the 2AR, in the 2NR, which, by the way, make a judge kick argument. And if you win any of the, you know, the links to the DISAD link to the counterplan, then, you know, you should just assume it's counterplan versus plan only. And, you know, if it obviously would cause Trump to win, then it's irrelevant whether or not, you know, the other stuff in the debate. Didn't do that. So that's number one. Number two, I would just say, like, there are framing things on each part of the debate, and like the NEG is obviously very good at making those framing style arguments. You need some pushback on all of them. There's like 3 of them in the debate, and all of them really sort of like paint the picture of what is important in this debate and how I should think about things. One of them is this uniqueness argument on the politics DISAD. How important is uniqueness if they are ahead on the link? One of them is sort of the like, how is the plan perceived versus how is the counterplan perceived? And those things are just like not, you just don't have any ink next to them. And so there just needs to be some better packaging in the 2AR to combat that. I think as is, they win, the counterplan links less because it is perceived differently than the plan. Even if the plan and the counterplan are the same in terms of like how much work they would promote and whether or not they're actually socialists, they would be perceived differently. And that packaging is just very good by the negative, and they do have a couple of pieces of evidence that hint to it. I'm not going to you know, tell you that those cards are really good, because truthfully they are not, but it's just the packaging of the neg. And so I think that the plan would be perceived as something that is socialist, that is anti-work, and that would be unpopular with older voters in particular, and generally with voters, and that would be likely to trigger the dissent. The other area that I didn't mention about in terms of just framing is the Trump. If he gets elected, populism explodes according to the NEG, and there just isn't any pushback in the 2AR about that. And so I think if they win, the risk of the DISAD is in the direction of the NEG, then like it turns all of the AF. The like time frame based sort of framing thing in the 2NR is not responded to either. So I really have to determine basically like which happens first. And I think the automation stuff sort of goes away because the AF just sort of like makes inflation bad, and that means that you know, automation gets sped up, and so that part of the AF sort of goes away, and then you know, the other element of the populism part of the AF goes away because Trump wins. So those 2 things, I think you just need like some alternate sort of description of how I should think about things. I think the DISAD risk is high-ish. The link stuff I feel like is definitively negative, especially in terms of older voters. The uniqueness stuff like is much closer, and I think could sort of be determined either way. I think that the one argument that the NEG has got, the sort of the 2 arguments they've got that sway me are, number one, like polls don't matter. Now, if you had something sort of lined up against that, it's like, how should I think about things if I don't look into polls? Because it seems to me like their argument about you know, older voters and they're the ones that are like now for Biden that are going to flip is based on polling, but you know, there isn't really an alternate sort of way of theorizing about how I determine uniqueness. And then you know, the second argument of it just like it's hard to tell. Like we shouldn't look at polls and like all of your that's saying that Trump is ahead is polling, and so I should just sort of assume it's 50-50. And you know, I don't love that, but that's just sort of where I'm at with the uniqueness part of the debate, and I am definitively on the link side of the debate for the NEG. So if I kick the counter plan, then the DISAD definitely turns the case, and then this automation stuff just sort of gets rid of the other part of the AF advantage, and I think that there's the dis-ed just very clearly outweighs the F. Yeah, so like those 3 or 4 things. The other thing that I have to say for the AF is the 1AR I thought was really good until you got to the elections DA. And then the elections DA was a lot less good. Number one, you're trying to do indicts of their evidence, which I love, but like it's at the expense of having just some like content like that's a little bit more substantive. And so you spent a lot of time saying their evidence is only about this and sort of like kind of stuttering in that part of the debate, and you just needed to say, here are the 2 things that we're gonna win, and just have a little bit of an explanation. And then even though you're not indicting their evidence, you've at least got a story to be able to fall back on that's a counter narrative to the, to the narrative that the neg has. And I just think that would have made for the rest of the debate to be a little bit better. And then the framing stuff that I've talked about in terms of the app, I do think you should start at least some of it in the 1AR by saying, if we win the counterplan, any of these link arguments are true, it means that the counterplan links, and you should assume that it's like 100% link. You don't have to win a scale in terms of like links to counterplan versus not, and just have like a little bit of a narrative there about how I should think about things. Otherwise, I thought the 1AR was quite good, but that part of the debate got away from you, and I thought that was sort of the most important thing at the end of the debate. So, 2R, you have like a lot of stuff, and I think you're very clearly going to win your turns case stuff. So I don't know why like Judge Kick isn't at the top. That very clearly should have been the case. And I do think you should be worried that when you read extra link arguments, that the app gets, a combo of both links to net benefit if they win one of them, and also just like new thumpers. And that is a little bit scary. The idea of reading new link arguments means that the 1AR can read new thumpers, which, by the way, when you hear new link arguments, read a new thumper. You get that. Like, and if you win one of the links, right, is inevitable, then like all of it's inevitable. And like, let's be real, Biden is going to like sell a lot of stuff prior to the election that's going to be labeled as socialist. So if those things get labeled as socialist, then obviously all of their link argument is true inevitably in the status quo, and it doesn't matter if the plan links. All of those other things do. So just be cognizant of that, and you can really have sort of a tricky 1AR that makes things much more difficult on the 2NR if you win any of those link arguments. And just like for debating me in front of me in the future, that's a good strategy against disad. If they read new link arguments in the block, read a new thumper. It's just like really, really hard on the 2NR. Less hard in like in the 2AC because they can counterplan out of them or do things to sort of get around the link stuff. But in like the 1AR, really, really good strategy. I think that would have helped. Like if you just had a little bit on that part of the debate, I think you would have been in really good shape, even though I think the impact of the app is sort of small and not really all that important by the end of the debate. But it doesn't matter if the disad is inevitable, so just a couple of adjustments. Other things for the neg, like I don't really think reading these EITC cards for like the NIT is very useful. Like I don't find it all that useful in some of the underlying parts. I'm sort of vibing with the app about it sort of being perceived as a cash transfer and being perceived sort of similarly. So if Judge Kick wasn't involved, like I said, I would have to think a lot because I just don't think that there's really much difference between the plan and the counterplan. It's mostly just good debating that is the distinction, not the evidence quality on any of that stuff. So I would be more worried about that going forward. Questions?
Yeah. So did you think what did you think of the populism deficit by the end? Do you think we were winning that?
I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I understand that it wouldn't matter.
The problem is that, the problem is twofold. Number one, when you're explaining this early, you're talking about it being universal versus like only applying to a certain population. Mm-hmm. It seems backwards to me. It seems like the people who are necessary to like reduce populism, mm-hmm. that the app solves are low income. And if it's not, and if you're right that like it's, hey, we do a means tested activity that it splits, causes people to split and disagree and causes more populism, then their arguments are not so much like, their answers to some of the populism stuff that happened earlier in the debate seem more compelling to me. So that sort of seems like a weird, just, thing. And then the other thing is that the counter plan, while it doesn't solve all of it, it definitely solves some of it.
Yeah.
And so like,
Some defense.
yeah, like, well, it solves some of like, people who would be angry, would, like, there'd be less of them. Like, even if it's true that it's like, it splits some of the population because it looks like we're dividing the population into the haves and the have-nots. It's not everybody, right, is gonna get upset about that. Some will, for sure, but some probably will be benefited by the fact that there's a cash infusion, and like, some of your evidence talks about that. I think that the neg is sort of hinting at that throughout the debate, and so like, I don't know how big of a solvency deficit it is.
Yeah.
It probably exists. It seems a little counterintuitive to me, and
That makes sense.
I don't know, it's like, you've gotta win that populism is based on the rich people and like, not based on the poor, and that just seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I think you debated it okay, it's just like, I don't know how compelling it is.
That makes sense. And then, one more. Sorry. So, like, do you think, like, if the 1AR had just kind of, like, started reading econ uniqueness evidence that's just, like, or, like, inflation really high now that, like,
You should read a card about that. You should read one card about that for sure.
that could have.
For sure. And